The moment I realized I wasn't alone on the second floor of the house, I called the police. The operator asked for my address and I was trying to answer in a whisper, because I didn't want the man standing at the top of the stairs to hear me. The operator told me to stay calm, then suddenly asked, "Sir, is there someone else in the house with you?" I was preparing to answer when another voice came from the phone. It wasn't the operator's voice. It said very slowly, "Don't look behind you." The phone cut off instantly, and at that exact moment the wooden floor on the stairs creaked softly. Someone had started coming down. This incident happened 2 years ago when I was in my final year of university. My parents had gone on a 3-day trip. My little sister had gone to my aunt's house. It was the first time I was staying completely alone in a 3-story house. I didn't think it was a problem. On the contrary, I liked it. I could study my lessons comfortably, play games as much as I wanted at night, and no one would disturb me. The house was located on the outskirts of the city. It was an old neighborhood. There was a considerable distance between the houses. At night, the street remained almost completely empty. Most of the neighbors were elderly people. After 9 o'clock, not even a car could be seen on the street. The first day passed completely normally. I went to the university in the morning. In the evening, I bought food from the market. I came home and watched a movie. Nothing was strange. Actually, everything started on the second night. The weather forecast showed heavy rain. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, the wind grew stronger. The trees in the garden were touching the window. The rain was beating against the roofs. Since it was an old house, the creaking of wood could be heard from everywhere. All of this was normal. I was sitting in the living room on the lower floor. The TV was on. My phone was charging. My laptop was on the table. It must have been around 22:40. Suddenly, the doorbell rang once, then a second time. I wasn't expecting anyone arriving this late at night. I looked out the window. There was no one. The street was empty. The rain was still falling heavily. I thought it was a prank by kids. I didn't open the door. About 5 minutes later, the bell rang again, this time longer. A strange anxiety arose inside me. I opened the security camera next to the door from my phone. The screen showed the front porch. It was empty. There was no one. But the doorbell rang again, even though nothing appeared on the camera. Part 1, I stared at the camera for a few seconds. Only raindrops were visible on the screen. The wind was slowly moving a small ashtray on the porch. There was nothing else. But the doorbell rang a third time. This time, I turned down the TV volume. I thought maybe I was mishearing the sound. There was total silence then. Ding. Dong. The sound was heard clearly inside the house. I looked at the phone screen. There was still no one on the camera. The first thought that came to my mind was that the camera had frozen. To check if the live feed was working, I turned the porch light off and on from the app. The light went out. Then it turned back on, so the feed was live. While I was still trying to understand this, a notification came to my phone. Motion detected, backyard camera, the backyard. This was strange. My parents never went out to the backyard at night. I opened the second camera with my phone. For the first few seconds, nothing was visible. Then there was a brief movement in the left corner of the feed, as if someone drew back behind the fence. The picture was so dark that I couldn't make out what it was. I zoomed in on the camera. Emptiness. There was no one. My heart started beating a bit faster. To calm myself down, I thought it was a cat or the wind, but a strange feeling had arisen inside me. I truly felt for the first time that I was alone in the house. I got up and checked all the doors. The front door was locked. The back door was locked. The kitchen windows were locked. Everything seemed normal. When I returned to the living room, the TV screen went black. The electricity hadn't cut out. The lights were on, but the TV had turned off as if by itself. I took the remote and turned it back on. The screen lit up for just a single second. Then a camera image appeared on the screen. It wasn't my security camera. It was a black and white image, as if it was coming from an old CCTV camera. A long hallway was visible in the image. There was no one. I started pressing the buttons on the remote. The channel wouldn't change. Then a dark silhouette appeared at the far end of the hallway. It stood far away. It wasn't moving. I tried to turn down the TV volume, but the remote wasn't working. The silhouette slowly began to step forward. One step, then a second, then a third. At that exact moment, the TV suddenly shut off. The living room fell back into silence. I was still staring at the screen. Then a very faint sound came from the upper floor of the house, as if someone was walking with slow steps in the hallway. At first, I attributed the sound from the upper floor to the creaking of the old house's wood. The rain had intensified and the wind was shaking the walls of the house. I was trying to convince myself that everything I heard was normal. But about 10 seconds later, the same sound came again. This time it was clearer. It sounded like someone walking slowly on the wooden floor. One step, then a short pause, another step. I knew the layout of the house very well. On the upper floor, there was my parents' bedroom, my sister's room, a small bathroom, and a long hallway. The steps sounded as if they were coming from the middle of the hallway. I, on the other hand, was standing in the living room on the lower floor, and the stairs were right in front of me. I didn't move from my spot for a few minutes. Then I took out my phone and opened the security cameras again. The front door looked normal. There was no longer any movement on the backyard camera either. I took a deep breath and said to myself, "It's probably a rat." But as I said this, I felt that even I didn't believe it. I wanted to go to the kitchen and get a glass of water. While filling the glass, my eyes caught the window. The rain was beating against the glass. The yard was completely dark. Suddenly, lightning struck, and for a moment the yard lit up like daytime. I could swear that during that 1 second I saw a black human-like silhouette near the fence. As soon as the light from the lightning vanished, everywhere plunged back into darkness. I immediately approached the window, but nothing was visible anymore. I forced myself to smile. "You're just scaring yourself," I said. At that very moment, a new notification arrived on my phone. "Back door open." For a moment, my brain didn't accept this. I had checked the back door myself just a few minutes ago. It was locked. I opened the notification. The app showed that the door had been opened just 3 seconds ago. I ran toward the door at the back of the kitchen. The door was closed. The lock was also in place. I pushed the handle down. It didn't open. The app had shown an error. Or I couldn't finish my thought. Because this time the sound came not from above but right behind me. It was very faint, as if someone whispered at the other end of the kitchen. I turned around immediately. The kitchen was empty. However, at that moment, my eyes caught the mirror on the wall. In the mirror, the hallway behind me was visible. At the end of the hallway, near the living room, a dark figure was standing. Reflexively, I turned back around. There was no one. I looked at the mirror again. The figure had vanished too. I was already beginning to feel that this wasn't just my imagination. My heart was beating so fast that I could hear my own pulse inside my ears. I took my phone and called my father. It rang once, twice, 3 times. He didn't answer. I called my mother. She didn't answer either. I knew the network was weak because they were in a mountainous area. Just as I was thinking about dialing the police, a very loud sound came from the upper floor of the house. This was no longer the sound of steps, as if a heavy piece of furniture had been dragged across the floor. And then, quite clearly, someone started running on the upper floor. I froze. This sound didn't resemble the random creaking made by old houses. Someone was truly running on the upper floor. The steps continued from one end of the hallway to the other, then abruptly stopped. It was as if that person had stopped where the stairs began. Holding my breath, I looked at the stairs. The upper floor was completely dark. In the hallway, only the lightning coming through the window illuminated the walls every now and then. I was holding my phone so tightly that I almost dropped it from my hand. I knew I had to call the police, but there was a strange feeling inside me. If someone had truly entered the house and I started talking, they would know my exact location. Despite this, I dialed 112. The operator answered and asked in a calm voice what was happening. I began to speak in as low a voice as possible. "I think someone has entered my house. I am currently on the lower floor. Footsteps are coming from upstairs." Operator asked me for the address. While I was speaking, my eyes were inevitably fixed on the stairs. At that exact moment, a very faint shadow moved on the upper floor. At first, I thought it was a shadow created by the lightning. Then I realized that the shadow didn't vanish along with the light. On the contrary, it stood at the top of the stairs, looking at me. I couldn't make out its face. It was just a dark, completely motionless, human-sized silhouette. The operator repeated my name several times on the phone. "Sir, can you hear me?" Whispering, I said, "Yes, there is someone on the stairs." Operator immediately asked, "Have you locked the doors?" "Yes. Windows, they are all closed." There was a silence for a few seconds. Then the operator's voice changed strangely. It was as if static mixed into the line. Following that, I heard a sentence in a very low, almost a whispered tone, "Don't look up." I froze. "Excuse me, what did you say?" The normal operator voice came from the other end of the phone. I didn't say anything. "A patrol is currently being dispatched." My throat was dry. The voice I had heard just a moment ago did not belong to the operator. I was sure of it. At that exact moment, the silhouette at the top of the stairs moved. One step, then another step. The wooden stairs creaked slowly. That thing was descending very slowly. I was afraid to even breathe. I still couldn't see its face. I could only make out the human shape approaching me out of the darkness. Lightning struck. For a moment, the entire staircase lit up. There was no one there. The stairs were completely empty. I stared without blinking for a few seconds. Then darkness fell again. Right at this moment, the sound of a door came from the upper floor of the house. The long creak of a slowly opening wooden door. My parents' bedroom door, followed by my sister's room door. Then the bathroom door. It was as if all the doors upstairs were opening one by one. I already understood that this couldn't be a coincidence. The operator instructed me to move to a safe room on the lower floor and hide until the police arrived. The small storage room next to the kitchen came to my mind. There was no window there, and its door locked from the inside. Pressing the phone to my ear, I began to walk with slow steps toward the storage room. I had just grabbed the door handle when the sound coming from the upper floor froze my entire body. Someone called my name very calmly, very clearly. But this voice wasn't coming from upstairs. This voice was coming from inside the storage room. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My hand was still on the handle of the storage room, but I no longer dared to open the door. The voice I had heard just a moment ago had said my name so calmly, as if someone was standing in the darkness inside the room, waiting for me to open the door. The operator was saying something on the phone, but I couldn't concentrate. "Can you hear me?" I answered in a whisper. A sound came from inside the storage room. A brief silence ensued on the other side. "Are you inside the storage room?" "No." "Then don't open the door." As soon as I heard this sentence, I took my hand off the handle and slowly stepped backward. I didn't take my eyes off the door. The house had plunged back into silence. Even the sound of the rain couldn't be heard like before. It was as if the whole world had stopped. Suddenly, 3 knocks came very slowly against the wood from the other side of the storage door. Knock. It waited for a few seconds. Knock. Silence again. The last time it was knocked harder. Knock. As I backed away, my heel hit the leg of the table, making a small sound. At that moment, the knocking behind the door stopped. A few seconds later, a faint shadow appeared from the narrow gap under the door. Someone was standing on the other side of the door. I couldn't see their feet, but the dark silhouette blocking the light was clearly discernible. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "It's here," the operator said in a calm voice. "The patrol is on the way. They will arrive in about 6 minutes. 6 minutes. This felt like 6 hours to me. The shadow behind the door wasn't moving. Then very slowly the door handle went down. Click. The lock didn't open. Once more click. Then stronger, the handle began to move up and down. As for me, I was frozen in my spot. It wasn't trying to break the door down. It was just testing it, as if it wanted to know whether someone was inside. Suddenly, the phone screen went black. The call was continuing, but the screen had become completely black. At that exact moment, the voice in my ear changed. The operator's breathing could be heard. Then they said in a low voice, "It hasn't seen you yet," whispered. "What?" No answer came. A few seconds later, the same voice spoke again. "If you run, it will look." I already understood that this was not the operator. Out of fear, I pulled the phone away from my ear. The screen lit up again. The operator was calling out to me in a panic. "Sir, are you still on the line?" Before I could manage to say yes. All the lights in the house went out at once. Darkness swallowed the room, the TV, the kitchen, the hallway, all of them. The only light was coming from the phone screen. The backup generator was supposed to kick in after a few seconds, but it didn't kick in. The house was completely plunged into darkness. I turned on the phone's flashlight. The thin beam of light illuminated the hallway. The storage door was still in front of me, but the shadow under the door had vanished. I tried to breathe a sigh of relief. Maybe it had left, maybe. Right at this moment, the creaking of the wooden floor was heard very slowly from the upper floor. One step, then a second, then a third. This time the sound wasn't approaching the stairs, on the contrary. It was as if someone was walking toward my room on the upper floor, and suddenly a new notification came to my phone. Bedroom camera motion detected, my bedroom. But no camera had been installed inside the house. I stared at the phone screen for a few seconds. The notification was written clearly, bedroom camera motion detected. At first, I thought it was an app glitch, because a camera had never been installed inside the house. My father had only put cameras at the front door, the backyard, and the garage. I had installed this system along with him, and I knew by heart which cameras were where. Nonetheless, I tapped on the notification. The app opened and a new camera appeared on the screen. Its name was simply Bedroom. My finger froze over the screen for a moment. Then I opened the feed. For a few seconds, only a black screen was visible. Following that, a faint static hiss was heard and the image slowly began to clear up. The camera seemed to be shooting from the upper corner of the room, but there had never been such a camera in my room. My bed, my writing desk, the bookshelf. Everything was in its place. Since the light was off, the room appeared gray. At first glance, nothing was strange. Then I saw a very faint movement in the bottom right corner of the screen. Someone was standing next to my bed. Only the feet of the figure were visible. It was so motionless that at first I thought it was a shadow. I brought the phone even closer to my face. At that exact moment, the image froze for a few seconds. Then the figure was no longer next to the bed. Now it was standing in front of the bedroom door. I held my breath. This wasn't possible. The image froze again. This time the figure was closer to the camera. I still couldn't make out its face. Only a dark human silhouette was visible. The camera was shaking like an old security camera. Subsequently, the image went completely black, and a single sentence appeared on the screen. Live connection LOST. I was still looking at the screen when a very faint sound came from the upper floor. This time it wasn't the sound of steps. The door to my room closed slowly. The sound was so familiar that it was impossible for me to have misheard it. The hinge of that door had been creaking the same way for years. I heard that same sound every night. The phone rang again. It was the operator. I answered the call. Patrol has entered your street. They are approaching the front of your house. Hearing these words, I breathed a sigh of relief for the first time. So everything would be over in a few minutes, but the operator suddenly went silent. Another male voice was heard in the background. Wait. Then static arose on the line. The operator spoke again. Do not approach the front door. Why? The patrol car hasn't reached your street yet. Confounded, I said. But you said they have arrived. Operator's voice trembled. I didn't say such a thing. At that exact moment, red and blue lights fell on the window from the front of the house. It looked like the flashers of a police car. Reflexively, I parted the curtain. A police car was indeed standing in the street, but something was wrong. There was no number on the car. No police logo was visible on its doors. The headlights were on, but the sound of the engine couldn't be heard. Then the driver's door opened. Someone dressed in a police uniform got out. He raised his head and looked straight at my window. Meanwhile, the operator on my phone screamed at the same time, "Get away from the window. He is not a cop." Hearing the operator's scream, I let go of the curtain and took a step back. My heart was beating so fast that it felt like it would burst out of my chest. For a few seconds, I leaned against the wall without doing anything. Then, unable to overcome my curiosity, I looked out at the street from the edge of the curtain again. The car was still in its place, but now another detail caught my attention. Despite its headlights being on, their light wasn't reflected on the street. The wet asphalt normally should have reflected the red and blue colors. Here, however, the light fell only on the wall of my house. The street itself remained dark. The man who got out of the car wasn't moving. His hands were hanging by his sides, and he had raised his head unnaturally toward my room. The operator was still talking. Open the door. Under no circumstances. What should I do? The real patrol will be there in about 4 minutes. 4 minutes, I said in a whisper. For me, this was an eternity. At that exact moment, the front door was knocked 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. Neither the bell was rung, nor did they call out police. Just 3 quiet knocks, then total silence. A few seconds later, the same knocking came again. This time slower. Knock, pause, knock, another pause, knock. The operator held their breath. He is not testing your door. What is he testing? Whether you are inside. After these words, my entire body went cold. I had no intention of even approaching the door. But at that moment, the sound of glass came from the back of the house as if something had touched the window. Then a second time, stronger. Running, I went toward the kitchen. I carefully parted the curtain of the backyard door. Nothing was visible. I brought the phone's flashlight close to the glass. The light fell upon the grass in the yard. It was empty. Just as I wanted to let go of the curtain, I saw my own reflection on the phone screen. At first, I thought it was just my reflection in the glass. Then I realized that I wasn't moving. But the reflection on the screen slowly turned its head toward me. Out of fear, I dropped the phone from my hand. As soon as the phone hit the ground, the screen turned off. A few seconds later, I picked it up. Everything was normal. The operator was calling my name repeatedly. I was trying to answer when a new sound was heard inside the house. This time, not from the upper floor, from the living room, as if the TV had turned on by itself. I walked with slow steps toward the living room. The TV was indeed working, but it wasn't showing any channel. There were only black and white static lines on the screen. Suddenly, the image changed. A camera-like feed opened. My living room was visible. The couch, the table, the stairs, everything was as it was. After looking for a few seconds, my breath hitched, because I was also visible in the feed, but while I was standing in front of the TV, the me on the screen was still in the kitchen. He slowly walked out into the hallway, then he raised his head and looked directly at the camera. There was no expression on his face. He was just smiling. Subsequently, the me on the screen moved his lips. No sound was coming, but I could clearly read what he said. "Look behind you." Reflexively, I froze in my tracks, because I heard someone breathing from a very close distance right behind me. The breath I felt on the back of my neck was warm. It was so close that I felt my hair move. My entire body was frozen. I was afraid to even breathe. The phone was at my ear. The operator was saying something to me, but I heard the words as if they were coming from far away. Slowly, I turned my eyes to the TV and the image on the screen. I was still standing in front of the TV, but behind me, someone was there. A tall, completely black-clad silhouette was standing right behind me. It was so close that there was less than a step of distance between us. Curiously, I couldn't see it in the room. It appeared only in the TV image. The me on the screen began to turn his head slowly. As for me, I didn't turn. I felt something inside me saying that doing so would be a very big mistake. Suddenly, the TV screen flickered. The silhouette vanished. At that exact moment, the breathing on the back of my neck stopped too. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and turned around with lightning speed. There was no one. The living room was empty, the stairs were empty, the hallway was empty, but the lock of the front door turned very slowly, click. Then a second time, click. I was looking at the door. Someone was trying to open the door with a key. This wasn't possible. No one else but my parents had a spare key. The lock turned a third time. Then the door handle went down. The door opened just a few centimeters. A cold wind poured into the house. I was frozen in my spot. Nothing but darkness was visible behind the door. Then the door opened even wider slowly. A man's voice was heard. "Police. Is anyone inside?" The operator on my phone screamed at the same time. "Close the door. The real patrol hasn't arrived yet." I ran toward the door with all my strength and slammed it shut, pushing against it. Resistance was felt immediately from the other side. Someone was trying to open the door. The handle was moving up and down, the wooden frame was creaking. I had put all my weight against the door then. The resistance suddenly stopped. There was total silence. A few seconds passed. Following that, a very quiet laugh was heard from the other side of the door. It wasn't loud, nor did it sound like a maniacal laugh, just as if someone was satisfied because they had accomplished something. The phone rang again. The operator said, "The patrol has entered the street. Do you hear the sirens?" This time I actually heard them. The siren sounds coming from afar were rapidly approaching. A few seconds later, the windows of my house filled with red and blue light, but this time it was different. The lights were also reflected on the asphalt. The engine sound of the car could be heard. The door was knocked. "Police, open the door, it's them." I hesitated for a few seconds. Then I opened the door. 2 police officers entered. They searched every room of the house, the basement and the attic. They checked everywhere. No one was found. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken window, nor any sign of theft. I told them what I saw on the TV, the cameras, the fake police car, and the man trying to open the door. They went out into the yard. A few minutes later, they called me. There were muddy footprints on the wet concrete step of the front door. But that wasn't the strange part. The prints weren't leading toward the house. The prints were leading from inside the house toward the outside. As if someone had been inside the house for a long time, and upon hearing the police sirens had walked out and quietly moved away. After this incident, I stayed in that house for only one more night. Once my parents returned, they sold the house. 2 years have passed since then. I have moved to another city. But still, sometimes at night, a notification comes to my phone for no known reason. Bedroom camera motion detected. And the scariest part is this. In my current house, there is no camera in the bedroom either. I was home alone and woke up at 2:17 a.m. to a knock at the door. My first thought was that my father had returned early. But when I looked at my phone, I saw a message from my mother. Don't open the door for anyone. Your father is still here with me. The message was timed just 2 minutes prior. At that exact moment, my father's voice came from behind the door, jarred. My son, open the door. I forgot my phone in the car. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, the same voice was heard again. This time, it added a sentence. I know your mother sent you a message. The phone dropped from my hand to the floor. My name was jarred, and this incident happened when I was 19 years old. My parents had gone to the wedding of our relatives who lived about 3 hours away from the city. As for me, I had decided to stay at home because I was preparing for university exams. Our house was located at the very edge of the residential area. There was no other house at the end of the street. On the opposite side, a dense wooded area began. That place, which looked quiet and beautiful during the day, created a completely different feeling at night. The last of the streetlights ended about 50 meters before our house. The section after that always remained dark. Before my parents left, my mother checked the doors several times, and my father said jokingly, if they knock on the door tonight, unless I've ordered a pizza, don't open it for anyone. We had all laughed back then. I wish he had never made that joke. The evening passed normally. I studied my lessons, then cooked myself some pasta in the kitchen and watched a movie in the living room. Around 12 o'clock, I turned off all the lights and went up to the bedroom. The house was completely quiet. There was no rain, no wind. Even the sound of crickets wasn't coming from outside. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up to a very loud knocking sound. At the first blow, I thought it was a dream. Then the second blow came, followed by the third. This time it was heard completely clearly. Someone was pounding on the front door with their fist. In a drowsy state, I looked at my phone. At that moment, a message came from my mother, don't open the door. There was a problem on the road. We are still at the hotel. I looked at the time, 2:15. So the message had been sent 2 minutes ago. While I was still reading this, my father's voice came from the lower floor, jarred. It's me. A strange feeling arose in my body. Because I had known my father's voice since childhood. This voice sounded exactly like him, but the message on my phone was saying that this was impossible. I didn't get out of bed. Sitting in place for a few minutes, I listened to the sounds coming from below. The house had fallen silent again. Maybe it's a neighbor, I thought, but that idea left my mind immediately. Our closest neighbor lived about 200 meters away, and no one would knock on someone else's door at this time of night. I took my phone and dialed my mother. First ring, second ring, third ring. Finally, she answered. As soon as I heard her voice, I breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, son. Is Dad with you? There was a silence for a few seconds. My mother answered with surprise. Yes. Why do you ask? I began to talk about the voice coming from below. My mother's breathing changed. Then, in a very quiet voice, she said, do not go downstairs under any circumstances. Before I had a chance to answer, my father's voice came from the lower floor again, this time louder. Jared, your phone is busy. Open the door. On the other end of the phone, my mother heard this. What was that sound? I whispered. That's what I was telling you. My mother's voice began to tremble. Lock your bedroom door. I got up and locked the door from the inside. As soon as the lock clicked into place, the voice coming from below stopped. For exactly 20 seconds, there was total silence. Then, very slow footsteps began to be heard. But this time, not from the direction of the front door, from the stairs. Someone was inside the house and was very slowly climbing up to the second floor. I pressed my ear closer to the room's door. The steps were not heavy. It was as if it wasn't fully pressing down on the stairs. The wood creaked very faintly, then silence returned. There was a strange rhythm to that sound. 3 steps. It would stop. Then 3 steps again. Then it would stop again. This did not resemble the walking of a normal human. My mother was still on the phone. I could hear her breathing. "Son, call the police." I switched the phone screen and tried to dial 112. But as soon as I touched the call button, the words "no service" appeared on the screen. This was impossible. The network was always strong in the area where we lived. Just a few seconds ago, I was talking to my mother without any problems. The phone returned to its normal state again. My mother's voice had completely vanished. The line was open, but only a faint static hiss came from the other side. "Mom," no answer came. A few seconds later, a very slow breathing sound was heard through the static. Then that breath turned into my father's voice. "Jared." I shut off the phone immediately. My heart was beating so fast that my ears were ringing. At that exact moment, the footsteps stopped too. That thing was already on the second floor. I was standing about 3 meters away from my bedroom door. Only the desk lamp was on in the room. The window curtains were closed. No light was coming from outside then. From the other side of the door, someone very faintly began to scrape their fingernail against the wood. The sound was so slow that at first I didn't believe I heard it. The creaking continued from top to bottom, as if someone was testing the surface of the door with their fingers. Subsequently, there was total silence. A few seconds later, my father's voice was heard again. "Jared, open the door. The joke has gone on too long." I didn't answer. The voice continued. "Your mother is downstairs." My entire body went cold. I had talked to my mother just a few minutes ago. How did that voice know this? Then it spoke again. "Look at your phone." Involuntarily, I looked at the screen. A new message had arrived from my mother. "Don't go downstairs. Don't look out the window." Message was timed just 10 seconds prior. I began to write a reply. "Where are you guys?" I pressed the send button. The message didn't go through. The network had vanished again. Suddenly, the light in the room blinked 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Then it went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness. The phone screen was the only light source. I turned on the flashlight. The thin beam of light scanned the room, the bed, the desk, the closet. Everything was in its place. Then the light fell upon the window. At the bottom part of the curtain, a shadow coming from outside was visible. Someone was standing on the other side of the window. But this was impossible. My room was on the second floor. There was no balcony to stand on outside the window. The shadow wasn't moving. It was just standing behind the curtain, waiting for me. I began to back away slowly. At that exact moment, the door handle went down very slowly, click. Then a second time, click. Then from the other side of the door, my father's voice was heard for the last time. "If you are not going to open the door." There was a brief silence. "Then I will enter through another way." As soon as this sentence finished, a very powerful blow struck the window glass from the outside. The glass cracked like a spider web, and for the first time I realized that the thing behind the curtain was not human. It was a miracle that the glass didn't shatter. Faint pieces of glass fell onto the carpet through the cracks. Instinctively, I backed away a few steps. I pointed the phone's flashlight toward the window, but since the light reflected off the cracked glass, I couldn't make out the outside. For a few seconds there was total silence. Then, on the other side of the cracked glass, 5 fingers slowly appeared. The fingers resembled a human's, but they were abnormally long. As for the nails, they didn't look like normal nails, but were thin and black, looking almost like burnt tree branches. That hand touched the glass and, without rushing at all, began to slide downward. The nails made such a sound against the glass that I couldn't help but clench my teeth. Then the hand vanished from sight. Just when I thought it was over, my phone vibrated. A message had arrived from an unknown number. "Open the curtain." My breath caught in my throat. The moment I read the message, a second message arrived. "I can see you." I immediately looked inside the room, behind the closet, under the bed, toward the desk. There was no one. A third message arrived. "But you can't see me." I put the phone on silent mode. My hands were shaking so much that I could barely control the screen. Right at this time, a very familiar sound was heard from the lower floor. The TV had turned on. I had turned off the TV myself when my parents left the house. Now the voice of a news anchor was coming from below. A few seconds later, the voice changed. There was no longer news. I could hear someone whispering. The words couldn't be made out, as if several people were talking at the same time in a very low voice. Then all the voices stopped suddenly. Following that, a single sentence was heard. "It's on the second floor." Hearing these words, the slow steps from the other side of the room's door started again. But this time it wasn't approaching the door. It was as if it was packing in circles in the hallway, to the right, then to the left, then to the right again. It felt as though it was searching for something. I tried to connect my phone to the network again. This time the signal had returned. My first task was to open the security camera. The house had only 2 external cameras, the front door. Backyard. I opened the feed for the front door. It was empty. No one was visible in front of the door. I opened the backyard. There was no one there either. This calmed me down a bit. Then suddenly a third camera appeared in the app hallway. I did not have a hallway camera in my house. With the tip of my finger, I opened the feed. The screen showed the hallway of the second floor. The camera was shooting from a spot close to the ceiling. My room's door was on the left side of the feed. The hallway appeared empty. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then someone passed right under the direction the camera was facing. It was impossible to see the face. Only the top part of the head was visible. It approached toward my room with very slow steps. Then it stopped and raised its head. The camera showed its face for the first time. I forgot to breathe. There was no face. As if there was a completely dark void where its head should be. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a pitch-black surface in a human shape that absorbed the light in place of a face. And the exact moment that creature stared at the camera without moving, the phone screen suddenly went black. Following that, a long black shadow began to crawl inside from under my room's door. The shadow filtering inside from under the door did not resemble a normal shadow. It didn't block the light. On the contrary, it seemed to crawl across the floor, spreading into the room. I pointed the phone's flashlight directly at it. The moment the light touched the shadow, it appeared to weaken. It was as if the light was getting lost inside it slowly. I moved away from my bed and drew back to the very corner of the room. There was only one thought inside my head: I have to get out of here. But I knew that something was standing on the other side of the door, and the window was on the second floor. If I jumped down, I could be severely injured. The phone vibrated again. This time, not from an unknown number. It was my father. Dad calling was written on the screen. I looked at the screen for a few seconds. Finally, I answered the call. "Hello?" My father's voice came from the other side. "Son, where are you?" "I'm in my room." "Downstairs immediately." I remained silent. My father continued. "Your mother and I have arrived. Everything is fine." My throat went dry. "But Mom told me that you guys were at the hotel." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then my father laughed in a very strange voice, slow, muffled. It was a sound that did not resemble a human laugh. Subsequently, the line cut off. My phone screen turned off by itself. The room was plunged into darkness again. At that exact moment, 3 knocks came very slowly from the other side of the door. Knock, knock, knock. And this time not my father's. My mother's voice was heard. "Jared, open the door." I closed my eyes. I said nothing. The voice came again. This time it was more anxious. "Son, please. I'm so scared." There was such a despair in that voice that I almost approached the door. But suddenly I remembered something. My mother never called me son. Since childhood, she always called me Jay. Thing behind the door didn't know this. For the first time, I was certain. There was no human on the other side of the door. Right at this moment, another sound came from inside the room. The closet door was opening by itself very slowly. I turned the phone's flashlight there. The inside of the closet was dark. The clothes were hanging in place. Nothing was visible. Then 2 white dots appeared from between the clothes. At first, I thought it was a reflection of the light, but they moved. These were eyes, 2 white eyes without eyelids, staring at me without blinking once. I drew back in fear. At that exact moment, the voice behind the door suddenly changed. It was no longer my father, nor my mother. Different voices began to speak at the same time with them. Some were female, some were male, some were children. All were repeating the same sentence. "Let me in," first quietly, then louder. "Let me in." Then they all screamed together. "Let me in." The door shook with all its might. The frame creaked. The lock bent. Meanwhile, the white eyes inside the closet were still staring at me without moving, and suddenly, they began to come out of the closet slowly. The two white dots inside the closet didn't move at first. Then they began to descend slowly. It was as if the thing standing there was bowing its head. I held the phone's flashlight tighter. As the light fell inside the closet, the hanging clothes swayed gently. Yet there was no wind in the room. The window was closed. The air was completely still. A few seconds later, a long, gray hand emerged from between the clothes. The hand resembled a human hand, but its fingers were abnormally long. The nails looked thin, black, and sharp. That hand slowly pushed the clothes aside. The creature standing behind them was already becoming visible. Its height was bent enough to fit inside the closet. It stood with its knees in a bent position. Its skin was gray, and its arms extended all the way to its knees. There were only two white eyes on its face. Neither a mouth was visible, nor a nose, nor ears. It was staring at me without moving. As I backed away, my back hit the wall. I no longer had any room to run. The voices on the other side of the door also continued. "Me in." This time those words weren't being whispered. It was as if the whole house was repeating the same sentence. The walls, the stairs, the hallway, the same word came from everywhere. My phone vibrated again. My mother's name was written on the screen again. Hesitantly, I answered the call. This time it was truly my mother. As soon as I heard her voice, I felt the difference. "The police are on the way," our neighbor called. "Whatever happens, do not leave your room." I began to speak, but the words got stuck in my throat, because the creature inside the closet was no longer there. The closet was empty. I turned the flashlight inside the room, under the bed, behind the desk, to the window. It was nowhere. My mother was screaming on the phone. "Speak. Are you okay?" The moment I tried to answer, I heard a very slow whisper right next to my ear. "You should have never looked into the closet." My entire body froze because this voice was coming from inside the room. Slowly, I turned my eyes to the right side. The light of the phone's flashlight was falling on the wall, and at the edge of the light, a long shadow was standing. But the owner of the shadow was not visible. There was only the shadow itself. It began to move slowly across the wall, first the head, then the shoulders, then the arms, as if an invisible creature was walking inside the room with only its shadow appearing on the wall. I couldn't move from my spot out of fear. Suddenly, that shadow stopped. It turned its head toward me. Then it separated from the wall. Yes, the shadow detached from the wall and fell onto the room's floor. Now, it was crawling toward me slowly. Right at this moment, a loud police siren was heard in front of the house. A second later, the yard floodlights turned on. All the voices on the other side of the door cut off at the same time. A deep silence ensued in the room, but I couldn't be relieved, because the shadow crawling toward me on the floor had still not stopped and was slowly reaching over my feet. The moment the shadow touched the toe of my shoe, the temperature of the room dropped drastically within a few seconds. My breath began to appear like white vapor. The hand holding the phone was going numb. And the shadow didn't spread across the ground like a normal shadow. It was as if it was alive. Slowly passing over my shoe, it began to climb toward my ankle. Instinctively, I leaped back. The shadow stopped immediately. Then, pulling back very quickly, it gathered in the middle of the room. For a moment, it took a human shape, long arms, a bent back, and its head appeared abnormally high from its shoulders. No details were discernible. It was as if it was a black void absorbing the light of the room. At that exact moment, a loud sound resembling the breaking of the front door came from the lower floor. "Police. Is anyone inside?" This time the voice was real. Heavy shoe sounds were heard right after it. Two people were rapidly entering the house. The dark figure moved for the first time. It turned its head slowly toward the door, then it looked at me. For the first time, a thin, pitch-black slit opened between its white eyes. This was a mouth, but it didn't resemble a human mouth. Its jaw began to descend slowly, even lower, far more than a human's mouth could open. It wasn't making any sound. It was just Gulumskiadi smiling. Suddenly, the whole room shook. The police's shout was heard from the lower floor. "Check the second floor." As soon as the dark figure heard this, it took a step back. Then it began to vanish. First, its arms melted inside the darkness, then its legs. At the very end, its two white eyes remained. They too faded away slowly. The room was empty once again. I collapsed onto my knees. Heavy steps were approaching from the other side of the door. Someone knocked on the door. Police. Are you inside? This time I dared to answer. Yes. They tried to open the door. Then I remembered I had locked the door from the inside. I ran and opened the lock. 2 police officers entered the room. One immediately pulled me aside. The other began to check every part of the room with a flashlight. The closet, under the bed, the bathroom. They found nothing. One of them looked at the cracked window and asked, "Who did this?" I couldn't answer, because when I looked at the window, my breath caught again on the glass, not from the outside. There were long handprints placed from the inside, as if someone had touched the glass from inside the room and looked out. The police searched the whole house. No sign of forced entry was found. The lock of the front door was intact. The back door was locked. None of the windows had been opened. When they brought me downstairs, our neighbor Tom was standing in front of the yard. As soon as he saw me, he said, "I was watching the house from the street until the police arrived." I looked at him. "Did you see anything?" Tom remained silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "No, but there is something strange." "What?" "Someone was standing at your room's window all night." My throat went dry. "Did they look?" Tom shook his head slowly. I couldn't make out how they looked, because when I looked there, they were always looking at me too. Police took my statement. I told them everything. The voices I heard on the phone, my father's voice behind the door, the shadow in front of the window, the creature in the closet. None of them said they didn't believe what I told them, but from their looks, I could feel they thought it was a condition arising from ordinary fear and stress. Towards morning, my parents returned home. As soon as my mother hugged me, she began to cry. As for my father, he checked every corner of the house once more himself. He was someone who had worked with security systems for years and wouldn't believe in such things. But after that night, for the first time, I saw anxiety on his face too. As soon as daylight broke in the morning, the police investigated the yard again. There was no footprint under the cracked window. No trace had been left on the wet soil. However, on the north side of the house, directly under my bedroom, they found something strange. There was a pressed trace in the shape of a large circle on the soil, as if something very heavy had stood there for hours. Curiously, neither entry nor exit footprints were visible around that circle, as if that thing had just appeared there. A few days later, my father decided to check the memory of all the security cameras in the house. I was right beside him. Front camera, nothing. Back camera, nothing. Garage camera, nothing. He was just about to turn off the computer when a file I had never seen before at the bottom of the screen caught my attention. Unknown device, and the date showed that night. My father furrowed his brows. "This file shouldn't be here." He opened the video. The image was of very poor quality, as if it had been transferred from an old VHS tape. The camera was shooting the front of our house, but this angle did not belong to any of our cameras. The video showed 02:11 a.m. for 5 minutes. Nothing happened. Then a silhouette entered the frame from the left side of the image. Its height was about 2 meters. It raised its head and looked directly at my bedroom window. It stood motionless for a few seconds. Then, very slowly, it smiled. The camera was not of a quality to make out a face from this far away, but for some reason, both of us could clearly see that it was smiling. My father paused the video. "I don't understand anything." He started the video again. The silhouette didn't walk, it didn't run, it was there in one frame. In the next frame, it wasn't, as if it had been deleted from the video. My father gave that file to the police. 2 weeks later, the reply came. They stated that according to the video's metadata, that image had never been written to our computer, meaning the file existed in the system, but had not been created by any device. A month after this incident, we sold the house. We didn't say anything to the new owners about what had happened. We thought maybe everything would be left behind. About 8 months later, a call came to my father's phone from an unknown number. The one calling was the new house owner. His first question was this: "Excuse me, did you also used to hear the voices of your loved ones behind the door at night?" My father hung up the phone without saying anything. After that day, that number could never be reached again. 4 years have already passed since this incident. I live in another city, in another house. I am in another life. But still, when it becomes 02:17 a.m. at night, I put my phone on silent. Because a few times a year, precisely at that hour, a message comes from an unknown number. Only a single sentence is written in the message. Will you open the door this time? I didn't want to tell this story, because every time I tell it, the same thing happens. Every electronic clock in my house stops for a few seconds. The first time I considered it a coincidence. The second time I was scared. And the third time I watched the footage recorded by my camera. The clock was hanging on the wall. No one had touched it. But the exact moment the second hand stopped at 03:33, a person appeared behind me in the camera footage. I was alone in the room at that moment, and the scariest part is, when I turned toward the camera, there was no one behind me, but in the video, he was still standing there. This incident happened 3 years ago. I was 26 years old at the time and working over the internet. Since I did most of my work at night, my life had completely changed. I slept in the morning, woke up in the evening, and spent the night in front of the computer. My parents lived in another city. As for me, I had rented a small 2-story house located in the old part of the city. The house was cheap, extremely cheap. The realtor explained the reason for this by saying the house was old. And I hadn't asked too many questions. During the first 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then a strange detail began to catch my attention: all the clocks in the house, every single one without exception, sometimes stopped at 03:33 at night. The phone, the wall clock, the oven display, the microwave. Even my old wristwatch. At first, I considered it an electrical problem. Then I noticed that this only happened when I was home alone, and only when I was on the upper floor. One night, I decided to find out the reason for this. I opened my computer's camera. I also placed my phone in the other corner of the room and started video recording. The time was 03:20. I said to myself, no matter what happens tonight, I will not leave the room. Back then, I didn't know yet that making this exact decision would be my biggest mistake. When it became 03:31, a strange silence fell over the house. Normally at night, the sounds of cars would come from the street, even if from afar. That night, it was as if the whole city had vanished. I opened the window and looked outside. The street was empty. Not even a street dog could be seen. There was no wind either. The branches of the trees stood completely motionless. I returned to the room and sat in front of the computer. The red light indicating that the camera was recording was on. The phone was still recording too. The time became 03:32. I began counting the seconds while looking at the screen: 56, 57, 58, 59. Then, the tick sound of the wall clock stopped suddenly. Such a silence fell over the room that I could hear my own heartbeat. I took my phone and looked at the screen. 03:33, the numbers weren't changing. At the same time, the computer monitor went black for a second. Then it lit up again. Just when I thought everything was normal, my eyes caught the small preview window in the right corner of the monitor. This was the live feed from the camera. I was sitting there, but someone was also standing behind me, tall, with his head tilted toward the ceiling, completely motionless. I turned around immediately. The room was empty. I looked at the monitor again. He was still there. For a few seconds, I forgot to breathe. Without taking my eyes off the monitor, I slowly turned around again. The room was empty as before. The window was closed. The closet door was shut. There was no one behind the desk. Then I looked at the monitor again. The figure had changed its position. It was no longer standing right behind me. It had moved to the left corner of the room, as if when I looked back, it had quietly changed its spot too. I took the mouse and switched the camera program to full screen. The image grew even larger. Now I could see it more clearly. Its height was about 2 meters. Its arms extended down to its knees, and its head was tilted strangely toward its right shoulder. It was impossible to make out its face. It was as if the light didn't fall upon it. Darkness swallowed everything. Suddenly, the monitor's sound began to crackle. A static hum came from the speakers first. Then very faint whispers were heard. I couldn't make out the words, as if dozens of people were talking at the same time. I wanted to turn down the volume. The buttons on the keyboard weren't working. The buttons on the monitor didn't respond either. The whispers began to become clearer. Don't turn. Don't look. It will look too. I turned around again, nothing. I looked at the monitor again. This time the figure was closer to me. Less than 2 meters of distance appeared between us now, and I hadn't felt it approaching. My phone vibrated suddenly. There was no notification on the screen, but the camera app opened by itself. The live feed recorded by the phone was visible, and this feed was shooting from a different angle than the computer camera. I was standing in the middle of the room. The figure was not in this camera. Confounded, I began to look at both screens. The creature was visible in the computer camera. It wasn't visible in the phone camera. I pressed the power button to shut down the computer. Nothing happened. I pulled out the power cable. The monitor didn't turn off. On the contrary, the image became even clearer. Now the figure's head was rising slowly. I thought I would see its face for the first time. But when the head was fully raised, I saw a pitch-black void instead of a face. There were no features, just a void in a human shape that absorbed the light. Suddenly, the image on the monitor changed. The camera was no longer shooting the room. It was shooting my back, as if the camera had changed its position. And in that image, I was still looking at the monitor. However, behind me, there was no longer just one. 3 figures were standing. None of them were moving. They were just all looking at me at the same time. At that exact moment, all the lights in the house went out at once. The monitor went completely black. The phone screen turned off too. In the total darkness, the only sound I heard was the wall clock working again. Tick, tick, tick. And then a very calm man's voice was heard from inside the room, right behind me. "Now, you can finally see us." Voice had come from right behind my ear. Reflexively, I turned around. There was no one. The room was completely dark. The only light was the pale moonlight coming through the window. I took the phone out of my pocket and turned on the flashlight. As the light scanned the room, everything looked normal. The desk, the bookshelf, the closet, the bed, but the wall clock was still showing 03:33, yet I could hear the tick sound. The hands were working, but they weren't moving from their spot. My phone vibrated again. This time, no app had opened. Just a single sentence appeared in the middle of the screen. "Look behind you." I had already looked behind me. The message changed immediately. "It's already too late." The phone suddenly switched to camera mode by itself. The rear camera had opened. The room was visible on the screen. I was visible too. I lowered the phone, then I looked at the screen again. Behind me, a woman was standing. Her hair completely covered her face. Her hands hung down at the 2 sides of her body. She was close enough to touch me. I turned around immediately. Nothing. I looked at the phone again. This time, the woman wasn't there. A short child was standing in her place. He had lowered his head. He was holding an old teddy bear in his hands. Out of fear, I threw the phone onto the bed. The phone's camera turned toward the ceiling. When I looked at the screen, my heart almost stopped. On the ceiling, 4 people were crawling. They were clinging to the ceiling with their hands and feet, not like a normal human, like an insect. All of them were slowly coming over the spot where I stood. Instinctively, I looked at the ceiling. There was nothing there. I looked at the phone again. All 4 of them were already standing right above my head in the phone's image. Then they all turned their heads down at the same time. Their hairless, pitch-black faces filled the phone screen. The phone made a loud crackling sound and the screen cracked. I decided to run out of the room. I opened the door and went out into the hallway. The whole house was dark, but a faint yellow light was coming from the lower floor. The kitchen lamp was on. Slowly, I went down the stairs. The wood creaked at every step. When I reached the bottom, the kitchen was empty. The lamp was swaying from the ceiling, yet there was no wind in the house. An old cassette recorder stood on the table. I had never seen this recorder before. Suddenly, it started up by itself. A hiss came from inside the cassette. Then a man's voice was heard. "If you are listening to this, it means they have already seen you." I wanted to approach and turn off the recorder, but the voice continued. "Do not look at any camera, because they do not live inside the cameras." There was a brief silence. Then that man caught his breath and said his last sentence. "Cameras just help them look at you." At that exact moment, the black TV in front of the kitchen turned on by itself. A live feed opened on the screen, this time not my house. My kitchen was visible, meaning the room I was looking at. But there was a difference in the image. The me on the TV was not alone. Behind me, 6 figures were standing now. And all of them began to smile slowly at the same time. As I looked at the image on the TV screen, my breathing grew heavy. I was standing in the middle of the room, but behind me on the screen, 6 black figures were standing along a straight line. The heads of all of them were tilted at the same angle. For a few seconds, none of them moved then. One of them slowly raised its arm. Instinctively, I turned around. My back was empty. When I looked back at the TV, all of them had raised their hands now, as if they were waiting for the same command. Suddenly, the screen flickered. One of the 6 figures vanished, then a second, a third. They were being erased from the TV image one by one. By the time I understood what this meant, it was already too late. They weren't vanishing from the feed, they were coming to the room where I was. At that exact moment, the creaking of the wooden floor was heard from the hallway behind the kitchen. One step, then a second, then a third. These sounds didn't resemble the footsteps of a single person, as if 6 people were walking with the same rhythm. My phone lit up again. This time there was no notification. The camera simply opened by itself. I pointed the phone toward the TV. The TV was visible on the screen, but in the phone camera, I wasn't in front of the TV. The empty room was visible, and I was standing inside that room. The phone wasn't filming me, as if I had been erased from the camera's memory. My heart was beating as if it would burst out of my chest. Suddenly, a new text appeared on the phone screen. "You are already on their side." As soon as I read this, the phone shut off completely. The battery wasn't low, it just shut off. At that exact moment, the lamp in the kitchen went out too. The inside of the house was plunged into darkness again. In the darkness, only the sound of the wall clock came, tick, tick, tick. But this time, with every tick sound, the footsteps approached a bit closer. I tried to turn on the flashlight. The light turned on only once. During that 1 second, I saw the end of the hallway. 6 figures were standing side by side there. None of them were moving. The light went out again, darkness, total silence. Then they all began to run at the same time. The footsteps were approaching me with lightning speed. I left the kitchen and ran to the living room. I didn't dare to look behind me. I was just running. When I reached the living room, I tried to open the front door. The lock wouldn't turn. I turned it with all my strength. It didn't open again. At that exact moment, all the footsteps behind me stopped suddenly. Slowly, I turned around. The hallway was empty. There was no one. A few seconds later, a single voice was heard inside the house. This time it was my own voice. But I wasn't speaking. Coming from inside the darkness, that voice said, "Are standing behind you." And at that moment, I felt 6 different breaths on the back of my neck. 6 different breaths were felt on the back of my neck at the same time. My body was frozen. I was afraid to even breathe. I was holding onto the handle of the front door, but I couldn't move my hand then. All the breathing sounds cut off at the same time. Total silence ensued in the house. Slowly, I began to turn around. There was no one. The hallway was empty again. I was trying to breathe a sigh of relief when my eyes caught the large mirror in the living room. I was visible in the mirror, but 6 figures were still standing behind me. Reflexively, I looked back again. Nothing. I looked at the mirror. They were all in their place. They were visible only in the mirror. They stood along a straight line without touching one another. The figure right in the middle slowly raised its hand. Then it pointed at me with its finger from inside the mirror. "Come closer." I drew back. At that moment, a small crack formed in the glass of the mirror. Then a second, a third. The crack spread to the entire surface like a spider web. But the glass didn't break, on the contrary. A shadow resembling a black liquid began to flow through the cracks, as if there was another room inside the mirror and darkness was overflowing from it. My phone started up again. I hadn't touched any but. The camera opened on the screen. This time, the front camera. I looked at my own face. For a moment, everything was normal. Then the image froze. The me on the phone screen slowly raised his head. As for me, I wasn't moving my head. The me on the screen smiled. I wasn't smiling. Then he moved his lips. No sound was coming, but I could clearly read what he said. "It's already too late to run." Phone dropped from my hand to the floor. Even though the screen was facing down, it was still working. In the faint light coming from the ground, the phone's camera was shooting the ceiling. Involuntarily, I looked at the screen on the ceiling. The 6 figures had appeared again. But this time, there was a 7th one among them. It was taller than the others. Its arms extended all the way to the ground. It lowered its head very slowly, as if it was looking directly at me. At that exact moment, all the electronic devices in the house turned on at the same time. The TV, the microwave, the computer, the radio. The same sentence was heard from all of them. 03:33 did not end. I looked at the wall clock. It was still 03:33, but I had been running in this house for more than an hour already. Time wasn't moving forward. Suddenly, the lock of the front door opened by itself. Click. The door parted slowly. Outside, the sirens of police cars were heard. Blue and red lights were illuminating the yard. Without losing a single second, I ran toward the door. Just as I was about to go outside, I heard a very quiet whisper from behind. This time, only one voice spoke. It was different from the others. It was deep and calm. "We will let you go." There was a brief silence, then it finished its sentence. "But we will return again every night at 03:33. I didn't look back. Pushing the door with all my strength, I went out into the yard. When the cold night air hit my face, for the first time I thought it was over. 2 police cars were standing in the street. The light from the headlights illuminated the entire yard. 2 police officers ran toward me. "You okay?" I tried to answer, but my voice wouldn't come out. One of them led me toward the car. The other drew his weapon and entered the house. A few seconds later, the second cop went in after him. I was sitting next to the car. I didn't take my eyes off the house. Suddenly, I saw a movement in one of the windows. The second floor, my room. Behind the curtain, 7 black figures were standing side by side. I blinked. They had vanished. I tried to tell myself it was an illusion born out of fear. About 10 minutes later, the police officers came out of the house. There was a strange expression on their faces. One approached and asked, "Does anyone else live in this house besides you?" "No." He remained silent for a few seconds. "We found 7 different footprints on the upper floor." My heart sank. The police officer continued his words. "None of the prints are on the stairs." I didn't understand. "What does it mean? The prints are only in your room. It's as if 7 people just appeared inside the room." Hearing this, my whole body went numb. A cop took a small plastic bag out of his pocket. Inside was an old photo. "We found this picture behind the closet in your room." I took the picture in my hand. It was an old, faded family photo. 7 people were standing in front of the house. The parents, 2 women, 3 men, and a boy of about 10 years old in their midst. A single sentence was written on the back of the photo. "No one saw us after 03:33. I began to look closely at the photo. At first, I didn't notice anything strange, then my breath caught. The house in the picture was the house I was renting. But there was another detail that truly terrified me. 7 people were supposed to be standing in the picture. I counted them one by one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In the background, a dark silhouette was standing at the window of the second floor. The police hadn't seen this. When I wanted to show the picture to them, the silhouette was already gone, as if it had never been there. After that night, I left the house for good. The house remained empty for a few months. Then a new tenant moved in. I was already trying to forget this incident, until 6 months later when I accidentally saw a news item on the internet. A 26-year-old man has gone missing without a trace in his rented house. The address wasn't shown in the article, but as soon as I looked at the photo, I recognized it. It was my old house. And when I looked at the date the news was published, my blood froze. The incident had happened at 03:33 at night. The police took me to the station that night to give a statement. I told everything that happened. The clock stopping, the figures appearing on the cameras, the image on the TV, the shadows crawling on the ceiling. The cop writing down my statement said nothing. He was just quietly taking notes. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, they allowed me to return home. I only wanted to pick up my essential belongings. 2 police officers entered inside along with me. The house looked completely different during the day. Sunlight was falling through the windows. Everything was normal, as if none of what was experienced at night had happened. When we went up to the upper floor, the police checked the room once more. The closet was empty. The mirror was intact. The wall clock was working. I had started to breathe a sigh of relief when, as I was leaving the room, thin scratch marks under the old layer of paint on the wall caught my attention. One of the cops took a flashlight out of his pocket and pointed it at the wall. Writings began to appear from under the paint. They were very old, as if years ago someone had written something on the wall, then covered it with paint. Only a part of the writing could be read. "Do not look at cameras at 03:33. Bit further down, there was a second sentence. "If they see you." The remaining part was left under the paint. My father moved all my belongings to another apartment that day. I never returned to that house again. About a year passed since the incident. My life slowly began to return to normal. I was already sleeping comfortably at night. I didn't wake up when it became 03:33. I had covered the lenses of the cameras with tape. I didn't keep a mirror in my house. Everything seemed to be left behind. Then one day I decided to sell my old computer. Before selling it, I was deleting all the files inside it. When I opened the camera folder, a video caught my attention. Its name was like this: recording 0333 final. MP4. I hadn't created such a file. And the date showed that night. I opened the video. At first, everything was familiar. I was sitting behind the desk. Black figures were visible behind me. Then the footage continued. The part I didn't remember began. In the video, I got up and approached the camera. My face was completely calm. I looked at the camera and smiled. Then very clearly I said, "If you are watching this, it means I have already left." I stared at the screen, frozen. I had never said such a thing. The video continued. The me in the camera turned his head slowly to the right side, as if he was talking to someone invisible in the room. Then he looked at the camera again. This time my eyes appeared completely black, and he said the final sentence: "Now it's your turn to be watched." Video ended at that moment. I deleted the file immediately. Then I formatted the computer. But when I opened the computer the next day, that same video was on the desktop again. This time the creation date of the file showed tomorrow. I already understood that moving from that house changed nothing, because the problem wasn't the house. The problem was that I looked at the camera once at 03:33. Now, every night before going to bed, I cover the lenses of all the cameras in the house. But sometimes when I wake up in the morning, the tape on all of them is uncovered, and the small green light next to my computer's camera continues to stay on even in the moments when I am not looking at it. I worked the night shift at a security company. My job was very simple: stay alone from 7:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m. at a large warehouse complex outside the city, monitor the cameras, and check the building every 2 hours. For 3 years, I hadn't experienced any problems. Then one night, one of the monitors activated on its own. And the scariest part was, that camera had actually been dismantled 6 years ago. At the bottom of the screen, it read, "Camera 13, basement corridor," and I knew very well that this building had no basement. Then in the footage, someone looked at the camera, and in his hand he held a security badge with my name written on it. My name was Mark. I was 32 years old at the time. I worked as a night guard at an old logistics center located about 40 kilometers away from the city. The complex was huge: 3 warehouses, an administrative building, a parking area for trucks, and more than 100 security cameras. On the night shift, I was always alone. The rules given to me were very simple: walk through the entire building every 2 hours. When a camera signal comes, definitely check it. If a camera that does not exist in the system activates, ignore it and never open it. The first time I read the last rule, I laughed. My supervisor had simply said, "This is not a joke." I still hadn't taken it seriously until at 03:14 a.m., a red warning lit up in the right corner of the monitor. Camera 13 connected yet. There were a maximum of 12 cameras in that system. I stared at the blinking red warning in the right corner of the monitor for a few seconds. Camera 13 connected. There was no such camera in the system. The first thing I thought of was an app glitch. I grabbed the mouse and opened the camera list. 1, 2, 0, 3, 12. And at the very bottom, a new line written in red: 13 basement corridor. My finger froze on the mouse. I knew the layout of the complex by heart. There was no basement there. Sitting in front of the monitor, I remembered the sentence my supervisor had said years ago: "If a camera that does not exist in the system activates, do not open it." The first time, I thought that this rule was not a joke, but my curiosity overcame my fear. I clicked on camera 13. The image opened immediately. It was a black and white security camera. A narrow concrete hallway was visible. The walls had turned black from dampness. Old pipes ran across the ceiling. At the end of the hallway there was a metal door. A rusty plaque hung on the door. Only one number could be read on the plaque, 13. I moved even closer to the monitor. This place couldn't possibly belong to our warehouse. Then I saw a very faint movement on the left side of the footage. Someone stepped out from the corner. His face couldn't be made out. He was wearing a black security uniform. An employee badge hung around his neck. He began approaching the camera with very slow steps. I pressed the zoom button. The picture was of poor quality, but the writing on the badge slowly began to be legible. Mark Sullivan, me name. Involuntarily, I grabbed the badge around my neck. It was still in place. I looked at the monitor. The man in the camera did the exact same movement. He also grabbed the badge around his neck. I pulled my hand away. He pulled his away too. For a moment, I thought it was my own reflection, but this was impossible. I was in the control room. As for him, he was standing in a concrete hallway. Then a strange thing happened, even though I didn't move. The man in the camera slowly raised his head and looked directly into the lens. When I saw his face, my blood froze. It was me, but his eyes were completely black. No white part was visible, just two dark voids. A faint static sound came from the monitor's speakers. Then that man spoke for the first time, but his lips weren't moving. The voice came directly from inside the monitor. "You are upstairs." There was a brief silence, then he spoke again. "And I am downstairs." At that exact moment, the sound of a metal door slamming shut loudly was heard from under the floor of the control room. There was no basement in the complex, but the sound had come straight from under my feet. For a few seconds, I couldn't move from my spot. The sound of metal coming from under my feet echoed through the entire control room. During the 3 years I had worked at the complex, I had walked every inch of the building. There was no basement here. There had never been one. I looked at the monitor. The me in camera 13 was still looking into the lens. Then very slowly he raised his right hand. He pointed at the floor with his finger once, twice, 3 times. At that exact moment, 3 metal knocks came in the same rhythm from under my feet. Bang. A few seconds of silence. Bang. Silence again. Bang. Reflexively, I got up from the chair. I took my phone and called my shift supervisor. First ring, second ring. Finally, he answered. "Mark, what happened? There is something under the building." Other side fell silent. "What do you mean, it seems to me?" "There is a void under the floor." Supervisor immediately asked, "Have you opened camera 13? This question froze me. I hadn't told him anything about that camera. "How did you know that?" There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then in a very tired voice he said, "Don't look at the monitor." Line cut off. At that exact moment, the monitor lit up again by itself. Camera 13 had switched to full screen. The hallway was no longer empty. 5 people were standing there. All of them were wearing security uniforms. An employee badge was around the neck of all of them. I zoomed in on the picture. The same name was written on the badges. Mark Sullivan. All 5 were me, but at different ages. One looked young, one had a beard, one's face was covered in blood, one's uniform was torn. As for the one at the very back, his head was tilted strangely to the side. Suddenly, all of them looked at the camera at the same time. Then they all smiled together. A crackling sound came from the monitor's speakers. This time, 5 different voices spoke at the same time. "Come downstairs." I yanked out the computer's power cable. The monitor didn't turn off. On the contrary, the image became even brighter. The metal door at the end of the hallway began to open slowly. The space behind the door was completely dark. A long hand emerged from there. It resembled a human hand, but its fingers were abnormally long. That hand touched the shoulder of one of the 5 marks. As for him, he didn't react at all. He just stood there and continued to smile. Then, a new text appeared at the bottom of the monitor. Access GRNTDBSMNT door UNLOCKEDI was staring at this text when a powerful metal sound came from the back wall of the control room. I turned around. In the middle of the straight concrete wall I had seen for years, a thin door contour was visible, as if there was a hidden door inside the wall, and from the other side of that door, someone was very slowly beginning to turn the handle. For a few seconds I held my breath. I was looking at the concrete wall. I had been working in this room for 3 years. Every night I had sat in front of that wall. There had never been a door there, but now, a thin metal contour was clearly visible in the middle of the wall. The handle went down very slowly, click. Then a second time, click. The door opened inside just a few centimeters, and ice-cold air came from within. Along with the air, a smell of old iron, dampness, and rotten wood filled the room. I looked at the monitor. The 5 marks in camera 13 turned their heads toward the door at the same time. Then they all looked at me together. One of them moved from his spot for the first time. Slowly, he approached the camera. When his face drew fully close to the screen, I realized that he wasn't me. He just resembled me. The inside of his eyes was completely black, and his skin appeared as pale as wax. In a very slow voice, he said, "The 6th one must come." At the same time, the hidden door in the control room opened a bit further. Slow footsteps were coming from inside the darkness. 1, 2, 3. But it was strange, the steps weren't climbing up. As if they were coming from a very deep place, my phone rang again. This time the number wasn't visible, just written on the screen was internal line 13. I answered the call. A static sound came from the other side, then a familiar man's voice was heard. "I am Mark." Angrily, I replied, "I am Mark too." Other side fell silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "No, you are still the Mark upstairs." My blood froze. "What do you mean, close the door?" Took a very deep breath, because I couldn't close it. At that exact moment, the line cut off. The door behind me suddenly opened further, this time about halfway. I pointed the phone's flashlight into the darkness. A narrow concrete staircase was leading down. Old rusty pipes ran along the walls of the staircase, and someone was standing at the very bottom of the stairs. The light wasn't reaching that far. Just a human silhouette was visible. He wasn't moving. A few seconds later, he slowly stepped onto the first step, then onto the second, then onto the third. With every step, the metal staircase boomed. I looked at the monitor. The image in camera 13 had changed too. The exact same staircase was visible there, and that silhouette was climbing up simultaneously, both inside the monitor and right in front of me. This wasn't possible. Suddenly, all the monitors turned on by themselves. Camera 1, camera 3. The exact same image was on all screens, my control room, me, and the open hidden door behind me. But there was a difference in each camera. In camera 1, one figure was standing in front of the door. In camera 2, 2 figures. In camera 3, 3 figures. The count continued to increase. In camera 12, 12 dark figures inside the control room were looking at me. Then camera 13 switched to full screen, and there only one person was present. It was me. I was standing at the mouth of the door. I looked at the camera and smiled, and very slowly I said, "Finally, we will swap places." As soon as the me on the monitor screen finished his smile, all the screens went black at the same time. Only the faint hum of the UPS device could be heard in the room. Meanwhile, the hidden door remained wide open. The concrete staircase descended into the darkness, and the cold air coming from below had lowered the room's temperature noticeably. I stepped forward to close the door, but as I reached the floor, a thin metal plate creaked under my foot. The footsteps coming from below stopped immediately. As if they had heard me. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, a flashlight beam appeared out of the darkness. Hope arose inside me. Maybe it truly was another guard. But as the light climbed up the stairs, I began to see its owner. The man holding the flashlight in his hand was wearing a security uniform. The badge I used was around his neck. When I fully saw his face, my breath caught. It was me again. This time it was different. His hair was completely white. There were deep scars on his face. An old stitch mark extending from his right cheek to his neck was visible. There were dark shadows under his eyes. He looked tired, very tired. He stopped in the middle of the stairs and said in a calm voice, "Close the door." I didn't move from my spot. "Who are you?" He fell silent for a few seconds. Then he lowered his head. 5 years ago, I also asked the exact same question you are asking. I didn't understand. What does that mean? He looked back. He was looking into the darkness at the bottom of the stairs. Then he turned back toward me again. "They choose one every time." Didn't answer. Instead, he took off the badge in his hand and showed it to me. The date written on the badge caught my attention. Employment start date, March 14, 2019. As for my employment start date, it was the year 2025. This wasn't possible. Suddenly, other footsteps were heard from below. This time it wasn't a single person. Many footsteps echoed on the metal staircase. The white-haired me changed instantly. The fear on his face was noticeable for the first time. They have awakened. Open the monitor, don't look behind you, and most importantly, he couldn't finish his sentence. A long black hand emerged from the darkness and grabbed him by his shoulder. He didn't scream, he just looked at me and said with his last strength, "Close the door." The next second, he was pulled into the darkness. The sounds of shoes being dragged down the stairs were heard for a long time. Then everything became quiet. I was standing there, frozen. Suddenly, all the monitors behind me lit up again at the same time. No camera was showing the warehouse anymore. The exact same image was on all 13 monitors, my control room. But the room was empty. I wasn't visible in any of the cameras. Then, a new text appeared in white letters at the bottom of the screens. Employee count UPDATDA. Second later, the text changed. Active guards. 13. I always worked completely alone on the night shift in this complex. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else here but me. As soon as I read the text on the monitors, the lights in the control room blinked 3 times. Then everything became quiet again. Taking a deep breath, I tried to convince myself that there was a logical explanation for all of this. But logic had already left this building long ago. Slowly, I approached the monitors. I wanted to use the keyboard to log into the system. I typed my password. Only one sentence appeared on the screen. Access DENIED, employee not found. For a moment, I froze. The system I used every single night for 3 years didn't recognize me. At that exact moment, the radio on the desk turned on by itself. A woman's voice was heard through the static. "Attention. The night shift is being changed." Right after it, another man's voice came. "A new employee has been accepted." Then total silence. A few seconds later, the radio said the final sentence. "The previous employee has been sent downstairs." Involuntarily, I looked at the hidden door. Footsteps were no longer coming from the bottom of the stairs, but very faint breathing sounds could be heard inside the darkness, as if dozens of people were breathing quietly at the same time. I wanted to take out my phone and call 112. There was no network. There was no Wi-Fi. Even the phone's clock had vanished. At the top of the screen, in place of the clock, only 13 was written. This hour did not exist. Suddenly, one of the monitors changed again. Camera 13. This time the hallway was not empty. A person stood with his back turned to the camera. He turned slowly. This time it was me again. But unlike the previous ones, there was no fear on his face. He smiled calmly and approached the camera lens. Then he knocked on the camera glass with his finger. Knock. At the same time, the door to the control room was knocked. Knock. I froze in my spot. The me on the monitor knocked on the camera a second time. Knock. The control room door was also knocked a second time. Knock. He raised his hand a third time. I was looking at the door. The third knock didn't come. Instead, a long black shadow began to slide inside from under the control room door. The shadow moved like a snake across the floor, approaching straight toward me. I backed away. My back hit the monitors. Suddenly, all the screens turned white at the same time. Then a single message was written in black letters. "Your shift is over." At that exact moment, heavy footsteps were heard again from the hidden staircase. This time, not just one person was coming. It was as if the entire staircase was full of people, and all of them were climbing up. The heavy footsteps were getting closer and closer. An echo formed with the same rhythm on every metal step. I was looking at the hidden door, but nothing could be seen inside the darkness. Then the first figure reached the top part of the stairs, followed by the second, then the third. Within a few seconds, dozens of dark silhouettes came out of the stairs and stood silently in front of the control room. None of them spoke. None of them moved. They were all just looking at me. All of the monitors shut off at once. The room plunged into darkness again. Only the green light of the UPS device was blinking. Slowly, I took the flashlight out of my pocket and pointed the light toward the figures. There was no one. The stairs appeared empty again. At that exact moment, a calm man's voice was heard from behind me. Pointing a light at them is pointless. I turned around. An old man was standing next to the control desk. I had never seen him before. He was wearing an old guard uniform. A rusted metal badge was on his chest. Only one number could be read on the badge, 13. He looked at me calmly. "I worked here for 32 years. There is no other person working here." The old man smiled bitterly. "That's exactly what I used to think too." Then he opened the old logbook on the control desk. The pages had yellowed. A date was written at the top of each page. 1989, 1990, 1991, 1992, 1993, 1994. My eyes widened. A different name was under each date, but at the end of all of them, the same sentence was written, handed over the shift. I looked at the last page of the book. Today's date was written there. The name section was empty. The old man extended the pen to me. "What am I supposed to sign?" He didn't answer. He simply said, "If you sign it, they won't take you downstairs." I backed away. "What if I don't sign it?" The old man appeared scared for the first time now. "Then you will take their place." At that exact moment, the whole room shook. The monitors turned on again. The concrete hallway was no longer visible in camera 13. The camera was showing the control room. When I looked at the monitor, my breath stopped. The old man and I were visible there, but behind us, all the marks I had seen until now were standing. The one who was young, the one who had a beard, the one whose face was scarred, the one whose eyes were black, and the old one who had been pulled into the darkness on the stairs. All of them looked at me at the same time. Then they said the same sentence. "You were always here." Involuntarily, I looked at the logbook on the control desk. My hands were shaking. My eyes caught tonight's entry record in the log. Time 1902, name Mark Sullivan's signature. This was my signature. But I had never signed that page. Right at this moment, the same text appeared on all the monitors in the room. Shift change in 000010, and a countdown began in the bottom right corner. 1098. The countdown continued in the bottom corner of the monitor. 876. No one in the room was moving. Neither the old guard nor the countless marks on the monitors. It was as if all of them were waiting for those numbers to reach zero. As for me, I was looking at the logbook on the desk. The pen was still lying open across the page 5. The old man said in a calm voice, "You must decide now. 4. What am I choosing? The room or the stairs? 3. I didn't take the pen. On the contrary, I threw the logbook to the floor with all my strength. At that exact moment, all of the monitors flashed with a white light too. An ear-splitting alarm sounded throughout the entire room. 1. The last digit vanished. Then, total silence. All the monitors shut off. The lights of the control room turned back on. There was no hidden door. The concrete wall appeared whole as before. There was neither a logbook nor a pen on the desk, as if what I had experienced over the last hour had never happened. I took out my phone. The clock showed 0700 and the morning shift had arrived. The door opened and the daytime guard entered inside. He looked at me strangely. "Mark, are you okay?" I just nodded my head. I was walking toward the door to go outside when he called out after me, "Just a minute." I turned around. He pointed to the logbook on the desk. "You forgot to write your name." I looked at the logbook. It was an ordinary entry log, but my name was already written on the last line. And my signature was right next to it. I hadn't written it. The daytime guard accepted this as completely normal. "The shift go well?" I didn't answer. I simply left the building. The next day, I called the company to quit my job. The woman in the human resources department fell silent for a few seconds. Then she said, "I'm sorry, but your resignation letter was accepted in the system 3 years ago." "What? You no longer work here?" "I was on the night shift last night." Sounds of a keyboard were heard on the other side. Then the woman said with even more surprise, "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because that warehouse complex was demolished 2 years ago." Phone almost dropped from my hand. That day, I got into my car and went to the given address. The warehouse was indeed gone. An empty, fenced plot of land stretched out in its place. A rusted plaque hung on the fence. "Area is dangerous. Entry is prohibited." When I looked past the fence, I saw a single concrete staircase in the middle of the ground. The staircase led underground. There was no building around it, only that staircase. I stared at it for a few seconds. Then my phone vibrated. A message had arrived from an unknown number. Only a single sentence was written in the message. "You are late. The new shift has already begun." I told the police about this incident. They didn't believe me. 2 days later, the police officer who took my statement disappeared. I thought it was a coincidence until I watched the final footage from his body camera. The video was only 19 seconds long. The officer was standing inside an abandoned house. Suddenly, he turned toward the camera and whispered, "If you are watching this, it is still behind me." Then the camera slowly dropped down, but the officer hadn't fallen to the ground. It was as if someone had pulled him up toward the ceiling. The video ended there. I decided to find that house. It was the worst decision of my life. My name is Daniel Carter. The incident happened 2 years ago. At that time, my friend Ethan and I used to explore and film old and abandoned houses. Our goal was not to find paranormal evidence. We just visited interesting locations, researched their history, and shared them on the internet. One evening, we received an anonymous email. Only an address and a single sentence were written in the letter. "Enter this house after sunset. If you have the courage, open the door of the last room on the upper floor." At first, we thought it was just a joke. Then we researched the address. The house had been empty for about 30 years. And the strangest part was that we found posts on various forums about the number of people who had gone missing at that address over the last 20 years. There was nothing in the official documents. But a sentence written about that house on the internet was repeated everywhere. "If you hear footsteps on the second floor, do not go downstairs." We still went, because until then we didn't believe any of such stories written on the internet. I wish we had believed them. Near sunset, Ethan picked me up in his car. The sky was gray. It wasn't raining, but the clouds were so low that they seemed to touch the treetops. The navigation led us to an old country road about an hour away from the city. At the end of the road, a rusty iron gate appeared. The gate was open, and behind it stood the house, a 2-story wood-structured house that was almost completely dark. Most of the windows were broken. A part of the roof had collapsed, but a strange detail caught my attention. The grass in front of the house grew up to the knees. However, the narrow path leading to the entrance door was completely clear, as if someone walked through there every day. Ethan turned on the camera. The clock on the screen showed 18:47. "Okay, guys," he said with a smile. "If we can't share this video tomorrow, then what's written on the internet is true." I laughed. Looking back now, I realized that laugh was the last time I laughed comfortably. When we pushed the door, the old wood opened with a long creak. A heavy smell of dampness filled the inside. The old wallpaper on the walls was almost completely peeled off. There was a thick layer of dust on the floor, but footprints were visible in the dust. The prints of a single person. The prints led directly toward the stairs. I knelt down and looked at them carefully. The footprints looked new. They were still clearly discernible in the dust. Ethan filmed this as well. Someone has been here before us. We began to follow the prints. When we reached the stairs, they were climbing up to the second floor. Just as I was about to step onto the first step, a faint sound came from the depths of the house. Knock. We both stopped. A few seconds later again, knock. As if someone was walking slowly on the upper floor, Ethan whispered, "Someone is here." I nodded my head. Probably another explorer. But even I didn't believe it. We began to climb up the stairs. Every step creaked under our feet. When we reached the second floor, a long hallway appeared before us. A half-open door was visible at the end of the hallway. The room written about in the anonymous letter had to be right there. We were advancing with slow steps when Ethan suddenly grabbed my arm. "Daniel." "What happened?" He wasn't speaking. He just showed me the camera screen. The hallway was visible in the live feed. I was visible, Ethan was visible, but a third person was also standing next to the door at the end of the hallway. He was tall. His face was not discernible in the darkness. I immediately raised my head and looked at the hallway. There was no one next to the door. I looked at the camera again. The figure was still there. And this time, it began to turn its head toward us very slowly. I stared at the camera screen, frozen. The figure turned its head toward us very slowly. Its face couldn't be made out, as if there was a dark void absorbing the light in place of its face. Ethan immediately lowered the camera and looked at the hallway. There was no one next to the door. When he raised the camera again, the figure was no longer standing in the previous spot but had approached a few meters closer to us. "Say anything," Ethan whispered. "Just back away." We began to step slowly toward the stairs. We didn't take our eyes off the camera. The figure approached again. As we took a step, it took a step too. But there was a strange detail. Its feet weren't moving. It just appeared closer to us every time the image flickered. Suddenly, even though the camera's battery was at 100%, it gave a red warning. Low BATTRYA. Second later, the screen went black. Ethan swore at the camera in frustration. At that exact moment, heavy footsteps came from the other end of the upper floor. This time it was heard completely clearly. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was approaching us. I turned on my phone's flashlight. I pointed the light toward the end of the hallway. There was no one. The footsteps, however, continued, as if an invisible person was walking on the wooden floor. Suddenly, one of the closed doors on the right side of the hallway opened slowly. Nothing but darkness was visible inside. Then the second door, followed by the third. No one was touching any of them. The doors were opening one by one. Ethan said in a very low voice, "Daniel, they are looking at us." "What do you mean?" He pointed to the ceiling with his hand. I pointed the phone's light upward. At first, I didn't see anything. Then thin fingers were discernible between the old boards of the ceiling. Long, gray fingers. They were slowly extending down from between the boards, as if someone was crawling inside the ceiling. I backed away. At that exact moment, all the fingers withdrew between the boards at the same time. The hallway became silent again. We began to run toward the stairs. We had taken only a few steps when the sound of the front door slamming shut loudly came from the lower floor. Bang, we both stopped. Ethan wanted to take out his phone and call our friend. There was no signal on the phone screen, but a strange notification appeared in the middle of the screen. "Second floor occupied." I read this and looked at Ethan. "Did you send that notification?" He shook his head slowly. "No." Suddenly, the phone switched to camera mode by itself. We were visible in the live feed, and behind us, there was no longer a single figure in the hallway of the second floor. Dozens of dark silhouettes were lined up in total silence, and all of them raised their heads toward us at the same time. Ethan and I turned around at the same time. The hallway was empty. No figure was visible. We looked back at the phone screen. They were still there. At least 20 people. They weren't all the same height. Some were tall enough to touch the ceiling. Some, however, appeared to be the height of a child, but all of them had a common feature. The face of none of them could be made out. The phone vibrated suddenly. The camera feed froze, then it began to change slowly. It was no longer showing a live feed, as if it was showing the future a few seconds from now. In the video, Ethan suddenly turned toward me and screamed, "Run!" I hadn't moved from my spot yet. I lowered the phone and looked at Ethan. He hadn't said anything yet. A second later, however, he actually screamed the exact same word, "Run." At that exact moment, the half-open door at the end of the hallway slammed wide open with all its might. An ice-cold air came out from within. Subsequently, whisperings were heard in a very low voice. Dozens of different voices were talking at the same time, but no word could be understood. We began to run toward the stairs. When we reached the stairs, Ethan suddenly stopped. It seems the stairs weren't like this. I looked down. He was right. When we climbed up, there were only 16 steps. Now, however, the staircase extended into the darkness as if endless. The lower floor was not visible. I pointed the phone's flashlight downward. The light didn't reach the end of the steps. Meanwhile, the whispers behind us were getting closer. Ethan grabbed my arm. "This house is changing." At that exact moment, footsteps were heard from below. Someone was climbing up the stairs. First step, then the second, then the third. As for us, we were standing on the second floor. We couldn't go down, nor could we go back. The phone vibrated again. This time, an old picture opened on the screen. It was a picture of the exact stairs we were standing and looking at. But the picture looked very old. It was black and white. A date was written at the bottom part of the picture. 19786 people were standing on the stairs. All of them were looking at the camera. As for the seventh person, he was standing exactly where we were standing. When I zoomed in on the picture, my heart sank. The seventh man resembled me. Ethan took the phone from my hand. Something isn't right. I was about to answer when the footsteps climbing from below stopped suddenly. Total silence ensued. Then a very calm man's voice came from inside the darkness. "Daniel." This was my name. I said nothing. The voice was heard again. "Daniel, Ethan has already gone downstairs." I immediately looked at my friend beside me. He was right next to me a few seconds ago, but now I was standing alone on the stairs. For a few seconds I couldn't move. Ethan was beside me a moment ago. Now, however, only I was standing on the stairs. I called out his name, "Ethan." No answer came. I screamed again, "Ethan." This time an answer came, but not from below, from the room at the end of the hallway. "I'm here." The voice was completely Ethan's voice. Instinctively, I stepped toward the room. The moment I took the first step, my phone vibrated. A new message appeared on the screen. Go toward the voice. It wasn't visible who the message came from. I froze in my tracks. At that exact moment, Ethan's voice was heard from the room again. Daniel, hurry. This time there was fear in his voice. I approached the door. I extended my hand to the handle. A few centimeters before opening the door, the phone vibrated again. This time, a different sentence was written. If it has called your name 3 times, it is no longer Ethan. My throat went dry. I was still reading this when the voice came from inside the room for the 3rd time. Daniel. A long silence, then in a very low voice, please. This was the 3rd time. I immediately drew back from the door. At that exact moment, a very powerful blow was heard from the other side of the door. Bang, the wooden door shook. Right after it, a second blow, bang, then a third. A long crack formed in the middle of the door. Darkness was visible through the crack. Then an eye opened out of the darkness. It wasn't a human eye. It was completely white. It had no pupil. That eye was looking directly at me through the crack. I backed away. I pointed the phone's flashlight at the door. The eye had vanished. But long gray fingers began to come out slowly through the crack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fingers crawled over the wood and reached the door handle. The handle went down slowly. The door began to open by itself. I started to run. I ran without stopping to the end of the hallway. Suddenly, a window appeared before me. I looked down. My car was still standing in the yard. The height wasn't much, about 3 meters. I broke the glass with my elbow. Just as I was about to jump, Ethan's voice was heard from behind me, this time very close. Daniel. He was speaking very calmly. Turn. I didn't turn. Turn. I didn't turn again. Then he said an expression he had never used before. Brother. My heart sank. Ethan knew me since childhood, but he would never call me brother. I was already certain the one behind me was not Ethan. Without thinking at all, I jumped into the yard through the broken window. I fell hard to the ground. My shoulder hurt intensely, but I got up and began to run. I wasn't looking back. I was just running. When I reached the gate, I involuntarily raised my head. A person was standing at the broken window of the 2nd floor. Their face couldn't be made out in the darkness, but they raised their hand slowly and waved it toward me. Then my phone vibrated. A new video had been created on the screen, and its name was like this: Ethan Final, MP4. My hands were shaking. As soon as I got up, I ran toward the car. I was trying to take the key out of my pocket, but my fingers wouldn't obey me. Finally, I opened the door, got inside, and locked all the doors. I leaned over the steering wheel for a few seconds to catch my breath. Then the phone vibrated again. Ethan Final, MP4 was still visible on the screen. I was holding myself back from opening the video, but curiosity overcame my fear again. I started the video. The footage was shot from Ethan's camera. The clock on the screen showed 19:16. In the video, I was standing on the stairs, but it wasn't me that was strange. Behind me, a tall black figure was standing. It was so close that it appeared as if it had leaned its head over my shoulder. The Ethan in the video whispered in fear, "Daniel, don't look behind you." As for me, I was looking at the stairs in the video without noticing anything. Then the image flickered. The figure vanished. A second later, I turned toward the camera. My face was normal, but my eyes were completely black. The me in the video smiled slowly. Then he said in a very calm voice, "It's already too late." Screen suddenly went black. The video ended. I shut off the phone immediately and started the car. The engine cranked, but it didn't start. I tried once more. It didn't happen again. The exact moment I turned the key for the 3rd time, the radio turned on by itself. A static sound came. Then a familiar voice was heard. It was Ethan. "Daniel, are you still in the yard?" I looked at the radio. "You never left the house." I immediately raised my head and looked through the windshield. The gate was gone. Nothing but a dark forest stretched out in front of the car. I looked in the rearview mirror. The house was gone too, as if the car had dropped into another place. My phone lit up again. This time the map app had opened. A blue dot showed my location, but in place of the address, only a single sentence was written: 2nd floor. I was sitting inside the car. How could I be on the 2nd floor at that exact moment? A slow knock came from the ceiling of the car. Knock, then a second knock, then a third knock. As if someone was walking on the roof of the car very slowly with very heavy steps. I held my breath. Then a shadow appeared next to the glass on the driver's side. I didn't dare to turn my head. but I could feel it standing there with the corner of my eye. A few seconds later, a hand touched the glass gently, long gray fingers, followed by a second hand. Then a pitch-black face leaned against the glass. Only two white eyes were visible on its face. It was looking at me, and it was smiling very slowly. I sat motionless. The creature on the other side of the glass wasn't moving. Its white eyes didn't blink even once. A few seconds later, it tilted its head very slowly. Then with its long finger, it began to write something on the glass. A single sentence formed in the condensation of the glass. "Look inside." I didn't look. I was trying not to take my eyes off the windshield. Suddenly, a very faint breathing sound came from the backseat of the car, as if someone was breathing quietly. I didn't want to look in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't hold myself back. The backseat was visible in the mirror. It was empty. I had just started to breathe a sigh of relief when my eyes caught the edge of the mirror. Two white eyes were visible on the floor of the backseat. Someone was crouching between the seat and the floor. He was looking straight at me. Screaming, I opened the car door and threw myself outside. When my feet hit the ground, I looked around me. The house stood on the hill ahead of me again, as if it had never vanished. Slamming the car door, I began to run. Just a few meters away from the gate, my phone vibrated for the last time. A call was coming from an unknown number. Without knowing, I answered it. Only a single sentence was heard from the other side. "Daniel." It was Ethan's voice, but this time it was calm. "This time it's truly me." I said nothing. He continued. "I am in the basement." My heart felt as if it stopped. There was no basement in that house. Ethan said his final word in a very low voice. "You are the one who brought it out of the house." The line cut off. Without looking at anything, I passed the gate and ran without stopping until the main road. A few hours later, I gave a statement to the police. They conducted an inspection of the house. The result was very simple. No trace was found inside the house other than our footprints. And Ethan was not found, neither alive nor dead. 2 days later, the police officer who took my statement also disappeared. His body camera was found at the edge of the forest. They showed me the final 19 seconds of the video. The officer was standing on the second floor of the house. Suddenly, he looked at the camera and whispered, "It is still watching me." Then he raised his head slowly. The camera showed the ceiling there. Dozens of people were standing on the ceiling. Among them was Ethan too. They were all looking at the camera. The video ended at that moment. 2 years have passed since this incident. I never returned to that house again. But every year on the same date, a single picture comes to my phone from an unknown number. The picture shows the window of the second floor of the house. And every year, the number of people standing at the window increases by 1.